Chapter 3. The euphoria that had swept over Thomas that spring evening did not fade with the dawn. It stayed with him, a buzzing, vibration stream of energy that changed everything. Sleep became short and shallow. It seemed sacrilegious to waste precious hours in an unconscious state when the world around him played in such bright colors and his mind was so full of brilliant ideas and witty remarks. In the morning, he woke not drained as before, but energized, ready to act, as if a perpetual motion machine had been switched on inside him. Returning to the technical school became a triumph. The old Thomas, the quiet, unnoticeable boy who always sat at the back row, trying not to draw attention, had completely vanished. In his place, a whirlwind flew into the classroom. He greeted everyone loudly, clapped shoulders, and tossed jokes on the go, which instantly evoked laughter. He stopped sitting in his usual seat in the corner and demonstratively took the desk in the center, as if declaring his new status. At first, his classmates were stunned. The transformation was too drastic. Where had the shy boy gone? The one who used to blush when called on by a teacher? And where had this brash, confident guy come from, who acted as though the entire world belonged to him? But his energy, his endless stream of quips and amusing comments, quickly found its audience. The group, consisting of 30 boys and a few girls, mostly bored during lectures on strength of materials or electrical engineering, craved entertainment, and Thomas delivered it generously. He had turned into the unofficial jester of the class. Not a single lecture passed without his interventions. As soon as a teacher said something serious or made the slightest slip, a witty remark would ring out from the central desk. Clever, unexpected, often borderline inappropriate, but almost always funny. The room erupted with laughter. At first timid, then increasingly confident, Thomas reveled in their laughter. It was like a drug, affirming his significance, his intellect, his right to be the center of attention. He commented on everything: the teacher's appearances, their manner of speaking, the content of lectures, classmates' answers. His brain worked at an incredible speed, generating one joke after another. He couldn't stop, even if he wanted to. The words flew out on their own, before he had time to think them through. He felt like a genius of improvisation, a master of words. The teachers initially tried to ignore him, then gave reprimands, raised their voices. But that only spurred him on. A reprimand? Excellent. A new opportunity for a joke. A threat to be kicked out of the classroom? Perfect. Time for a full-blown performance. Thomas, one more word, and you'll leave, the elderly drafting professor said sternly. The student had nicknamed him Compass behind his back because of his meticulousness. Professor, but a word isn't a sparrow, Thomas retorted immediately, feigning innocence. If it flies out, you'll have to chase it around the whole auditorium. And judging by your coordination, that might not go so well for you. The group erupted into the laughter again, while the now red with anger Compass yelled, "Out!" With a theatrical sigh, Thomas would gather his things, give a clownish bow, and exit the room to the sound of applause and chuckles from his classmates. He loved being thrown out. It had become part of his new persona. The rebel, the witty troublemaker, the guy who wasn't afraid to challenge authority. The shy, invisible figure he had been just a few weeks ago now seemed like a kind of mistake, a glitch in his character. This was the real Thomas, bright, charismatic, and irresistible. However, this newfound persona had its downside. His relationship with people was becoming increasingly complex and tangled, although in the rush of his new life, he didn't notice it right away. Things weren't going well with girls. The euphoria he had felt after Olga's request for his phone number quickly evaporated when reality struck. Olga did call him a couple of days later, but the conversation didn't go well. Thomas was too wound up, talking incessantly, interrupting her, throwing out jokes he thought were brilliant, but were actually awkward and nervous. He could sense how Olga grew silent on the other end of the line, responding monosyllabically. He tried to ask her out, but she dodged the question vaguely. She never called again. And this scenario kept repeating itself. His newfound popularity attracted the attention of girls, both in his group and from other classes. They smiled at him, started conversation, laughed at his jokes, but as soon as things got more personal than exchanging quips during breaks, Thomas would falter. He would begin to behave even more defiantly, alienating potential girlfriends with crude jokes or unpredictable mood swings. Inside, a fear was growing. A fear that these girls would see through him, past the dazzling jokester, and uncover someone else. Someone broken, flawed. He felt something was fundamentally wrong with him. This frantic energy, these erratic mood swings, this inability to control his words and actions. It all frightened him. How could he open up to someone when he couldn't even understand himself? How could he offer a relationship when he felt like a volcano on the verge of eruption? It was easier to push others away, to hide behind the mask of the clown, than to take the risk of revealing his vulnerabilities, his cracks. He craved closeness, but was terrified of it. If he maintained at least an appearance of humor and ease with girls, things with his friends, Remus and Andrews, were much worse. The two people who had known him longest and best were the first to sense that something was wrong and became the primary targets of his altered demeanor. At first, they had celebrated his transformation. "Finally, Thomas is waking up from his sleep," Remus had said. But very soon, the joy turned into bewilderment, and then into resentment. Thomas's jokes toward them stopped being friendly. They became mean, biting, often hitting the most sensitive spots. He started mocking Remus's optimism, calling it rose-colored snot and childish naivety. He sneered at Andrews's practicality, branding him a boring Philistine and a human calculator. He could publicly, in front of other peers, recount some awkward story from their shared past, making his friends look bad. "Thomas, stop it. It's not funny." Andrews tried to stop him after yet another cruel joke. "Oh, forgive me, your practicality. Did I hurt your delicate accountant feelings?" Thomas returned sarcastically, his eyes glinting with malice. "You don't like the truth? Or are you just jealous that I had the courage to say what I really think, while you always cower in your little corner?" Remus also tried to have a heartfelt conversation with him. "Tom, what's going on with you? You've become cruel. We're supposed to be friends." "Friends?" Thomas laughed theatrically. "Don't make me laugh, Remus. You just got used to me being a convenient background for your so-called great personalities. And now I'm in your way, aren't I? Because I've become more interesting than the both of you." Their conversations always ended in arguments. Thomas would become aggressive and accusing his friends of every sin imaginable. He was absolutely convinced of his own righteousness, of his superiority. He never saw nor wanted to see the hurt and disappointment in the eyes of those who had once been closer to him than anyone else. Remus and Andrews began avoiding him. At first, they tried to smooth things over, turn everything into a joke, but they only met a wall of aggression and sarcasm. Gradually, they grew distant. They stopped inviting him out, meeting up with each other instead. At the technical school, their greetings were dry and they tried not to cross paths. Thomas pretended he didn't care. Traitors, jealous fools, he thought bitterly and angrily. But deep inside, beneath the armor of self-confidence and bravado, there stirred an unpleasant feelings of loss. He ended up alone. Yes, he was surrounded by a crowd of laughing classmates, but this wasn't friendship. It was just a court, gathering around the jester on his throne. His true friends were gone, but admitting this to himself was too painful, too scary. It was easier to blame them instead. Thomas's change in behavior did not go unnoticed by the teachers. At first, they chalked his antics up to youthful rebellion and a desire to stand out. But over time, it became clear that the situation was more serious. His behavior was growing even more provocative and uncontrollable. He would argue with the teacher until he was hoarse over some minor issue, refused to complete tasks he found boring or stupid, and sometimes he would simply stand up in the middle of a lecture and leave, slamming the door loudly behind him. His frequent expulsion from the classroom were no longer just part of a show. They became routine. Notes in his report card, yes, they still had them in the technical school, appeared almost weekly. Disrupts class, behaves provocatively, insults the teacher. Finally, the administration's patience ran out. After a particularly heated argument with a physics teacher, which ended with Thomas throwing a textbook on the floor and shouting something offensive, he was summoned to the school principal's office. His parents were also called in. Thomas sat in the waiting room, waiting for his mother and father to arrive. He felt a mix of anger and anxiety. He was furious at the teachers, at the school principal, at the whole world for not understanding his brilliance and trying to force him into a mold. But he was also worried. What would his parents say? What would happen next? When his parents arrived, they were visibly concerned. His mother, a petite, fuzzy woman who works as an accountant, and his father, a silent, deeply absorbed engineer, entered the office. They had always been busy with work and their own problems. They only raised their son to the extent they thought was necessary, making sure he was fed, clothed, and attending school. That was enough, in their opinion. The conversation in the school principal's office was long and unpleasant. The school principal, a strict woman in glasses, listed all of Thomas's misdeeds over the past weeks. The physics teacher, who was also present for the discussion, added more details. Thomas sat staring out the window, pretending he didn't care, though inside he was boiling. His parents listened, frowning, shaking their heads. His mother occasionally threw up her hands in exasperation. His father remained silent, his lips pressed into a thin line. When the school principal finally finished, she asked the parents what they intended to do next. "Well, what can you do? It's just adolescence," sighed the mother, throwing up her hands. "Hormones are at play. He's always been such a quiet, calm guy, but now he's probably just trying to assert himself. Boys at this age are all like that. He's probably just trying to assert himself." "He's not just asserting himself. He's disrupting the entire class and insulting the teachers," the school principal retorted. "We'll talk to him," the father promised vaguely, speaking up for the first time. "Have a serious talk. Make sure it doesn't happen again." But Thomas knew there would be no serious talk. His parents were masters at avoiding conflicts. They always tried to smooth things over, ignore the problem, and pretend everything was fine. So it went. On the way home, his mother grumbled a bit about not upsetting the teachers and thinking about his diploma. His father added the obligatory phrase, "Behave yourself." And that was it. No serious questions about what was going on with him. No attempts to figure out the reason behind his behavior. No punishments or restrictions. It was as if they didn't see or didn't want to see the depth of the problem. It was easier for them to blame everything on teenage years than to admit that something was truly wrong with their son. This reaction